Okay, so I think we're ready to get started. Before we do, does anyone have any questions on anything up until now? And if you do, just go ahead and type Q, enter, so that I can see you have a question. And if you do have a question, then I'll go ahead and answer it before we begin. And if there aren't any questions, then we'll go ahead and get started. So I'll give you a few, maybe a minute to type Q. Yeah, I did intend to add the log files to the Git repository, more just for the purpose of instruction, just so people can see the log files themselves. Although, it's a good point that in general I probably wouldn't, but I think for this it's good instruction. I would normally have the logging directory outside of the directory where the Git repository exists. Any other questions? Okay, so let's begin. Now, first of all, up until now, it's probably looked a lot like we're reinventing the wheel with a lot of what we're doing here. But what you're going to notice is that a lot of times development is exponential. You start by building very tiny things, and now that you've built the tiny things, you can build the medium-sized things, and then very soon you find yourself able to build very large things. Sure, go ahead and ask your question. To a point. There will be a lot of content stored in the database, but not overdoing it. I'm not, for example, going to be storing entire web pages in a database. I've seen people do that, not, in my opinion, the best way of doing things. The important thing is to try to segregate roles as much as possible. So if you have the database, the purpose of the database should be, well, to store data. And the purpose of HTML should be to format that data. The purpose of the PHP is to process that data, and so on. So you use different processes for different tasks, and you don't want to write PHP and HTML in the same file. You don't want to store PHP code in a database. Things like that are not, in my opinion, good ways of doing things. All right, so let me just get a brief recap of where we are right now. So I think, okay, that's right, we had sign in or sign up, right, and log in. Okay. All right, so now what I think I'm going to do is to make it so that sign up actually works and we can create a new user with sign up. All right, so let's do that. Okay. By changing this input type to password, what it will do is when you type in the password, it won't echo it. So for example, it'll do that instead, which looks a lot nicer, and it also protects the data. So we're doing that. Second here. Okay. So now both of these forms have that effect. If I type in the password, it will actually look like a password. Okay, good. All right, now the sign up HTML needs to submit somewhere. And we specify that with this action equals, and now we need to put a placeholder here for the URL that it's going to submit to, and I've got to give it a name. Now, what I want to do is, whatever name I give it, I want it to contain the word sign up, because there needs to be a link between the .html file and the URL that it's going to submit to. So I'm just going to call this, let's say, sign up submit. Now right now, of course, that won't work, but we're going to make it work by changing the PHP code here, and we're going to, of course, do the same thing here for login. There. Okay, now the submit button on these pages isn't going to work because I've told it to go to a URL that doesn't exist, /login submit. Actually, what I could do is I could use the MVC framework to do this. In fact, let's. All right, let's do this instead. No, changed my mind. All right, so now here are the two classes that obtain the content for these pages. So wherever we have a placeholder, like for example, this brace login submit, we want to replace that text with whatever we want it to actually contain. So we're going to say that would get, of course, changed to brace login underscore submit. We want to change that to, let's just give a URL for right now, /. There we go. And of course, okay. Now I want this same thing to be on our other class file, and you're starting to see something by now, which is that both of these files have a lot in common, but they may not have everything in common. There might be some things that I do with one of the classes that I don't do with the other. I might have some functions that pertain to signing up that don't necessarily pertain to logging in. So there's going to be some shared elements and some unique elements. Now, in general, you don't want to write the same code twice. Is anyone else seeing that error message? Because it looks fine for me. I have another computer sitting next to me here, and I can see it fine on my end. Okay, yeah, so if you see that, just, well, just refresh the page. Okay. All right, so here's where we're going to go from here. When you're working with classes, one of the nice advantages to working with classes is something called inheritance, which in general means that one class can inherit the features of another class. Now, I'm a little bit shaky on my syntax here, so I might not get this right the very first time, but let's try it. Okay, so someone asked me the other day, why do I sometimes use echo statements even though I have the logging function? If you're doing something where you just want to see very quickly, yes, it worked, and then you're going to immediately remove the echo statement, it's pretty much fine. But where it becomes a problem is when you have tons of echo statements in if, and then you have if statements, and if this, then echo that, otherwise echo this, and you have maybe like 100 different echo statements. Then when it comes time to actually push the code live, then you'll run into a lot of problems. So it's okay to use this sort of echo statement sometimes, but don't overdo it. Now, if this worked, I should be able to test it like this. All right, let's see if that works. Yes. Okay. So I did get the syntax right the first time. All right, so now I'm not 100% sure if the constructor extends. Let's test that out. Excellent. Okay, so what this means is that I can take all of this code that is going to be there regardless of what page it is, and I can put it into this constructor for my general page class, and then whatever unique functions that this particular page is going to have, like the sign up page or the login page, I can create unique functions for those. And that means if I have 20 different pages and they all function in generally the same way, they look in a templates directory, they look for their name, they find a file that's that name.html, they make changes to it, things like that, I can do all of that with a single class. So the next logical step here is that I want to take this and put it into a file that I can do a require once on in each of these classes, like sign up and login. So let's do that. I push Control Z to get out of Vim without leaving it. I can push FG to get back in. So Control Z gets out of it, and then FG gets back in. And that's nice because I can start browsing my directories and seeing. So I have classes / pages. I guess for right now I can put the generic page handler in the main classes directory. So let's do that. Alright, so this right here, actually, all of this, I'm going to write to, what is it? No, it's there, www, can't remember. Okay, LiveStream Startup. Classes? Yeah. /class dot general page class dot php. Now, yeah, what would be the exact directory? I think it's .. Or if that worked, we'll know it very soon. Nope, I did something wrong, and I probably got the directory wrong. let's see. Alright, failed opening required. So obviously I'm not grabbing the right directory. Okay, fine. What directory is this? Okay, so it should be classes slash. Nope. For right now. At least that way I can know it works and that is actually the problem. Okay. Close. So this is now loading properly, but it's not getting the name of the class, so I need to give it the class name. Now it should work. What? Test function. Right, I need to get rid of test function. There we go. Okay, sign up works now. And last thing I need to do here is I need to get it to know where the file is. Okay, so I could just do a series of ... until I find it. Oh, there it is. Okay, so ... classes is what I want. All right, so this is it for the class.signup.php. And it should be it for the class.login.php. They should be identical now. Well, just about there. Okay, so you can see that class.login.php and class.signup.php are identical, and they should both work the same as they did. There you go. And the other nice thing here is that when I edit the templates directory for these two files, where it says login submit and where it says sign up submit, watch what happens when I actually submit the form. So here I am on the login page. And you'll see it goes to /login/submit. And if I go to the sign up page and I submit it, it goes to /signup/submit, which is nice because it's going to know to use the sign up class, and then the subdirectory can either be, well, I'll handle it however I choose to handle it. But the important thing is I don't even have to do anything unique here. All I have to do is put the name of the class and submit. Now, seeing that, I really don't even need the name here. I can just have submit. Or in fact, let's just make it a little cleaner and call it submit URL. And we'll do the same thing here. And now, in the general class, take out submit. There we go. Oh no, what am I? Let's see. Okay, there we go. That should do the trick. Yep, works fine. Okay, so I have a question about why I'm getting all the way out of Vim instead of using colon and exclamation mark. Well, if you're using colon exclamation mark, for example, like this, you can run commands, of course, but you can't really browse through directories that easy. So the reason I was Control Z is so I could go through the different directories and browse around so that I could kind of get a feel of the architecture so far and how I wanted to do that. All right, now let's see, what do I want to do now? Okay, so the next thing is I really want to have a way to sign up. So I want to be able to create a new username and password and actually see that I create an entry in the database for that. So it goes therefore that class.signup.php is going to have a function that's going to create a new user once it's submitted. So I have to figure out a few things here. I have to figure out exactly where this submission is going to go. Is it going to be part of the same class.signup, or am I going to have a separate class for handling the form submissions? I have to kind of make that decision. And I kind of like the idea of having it at least in the same source code file, and given that there's plenty of room here, let's just do that. So what we're going to do, we're going to create a function here that will always execute as soon as the class executes, a kind of second constructor. We're just going to call it maybe begin, I don't know. Why not? Yeah, let's call it init for initializing. And this function is going to exist in any class that I create using this method. And the reason why is because I might want to do something in one class that doesn't happen in another, whereas the constructor here will happen all the time. So at the bottom of this constructor, it needs to call that function. Like so. All right, now, make sure that works. Good. Oops, I did not mean to click on that. 1 second while I wait for this to load. No, I'll just go here while I wait for it to load. Okay. And we can exit that. Did not want to open that. All right. So now let's see. All right, good. All right, so for this sign up, I want to see if the form was submitted. Good. All right. If the form was submitted, I don't want to show the sign-up form. So the act of actually displaying the content needs to be a function inside of the class, but not part of the constructor. So we need to make that a separate function. That way we can control that. And now we need to change, we need to create a $this content and set it equal to $content. That way other functions within this class can see it. And now we need to take out this. All right. Hold on 1 second, I apologize. Okay, back with you. All right. Now, where was I? I love interruptions. Okay. All right, yeah, so I want to display the content only if there is content to display. So I need there to be a way to check that there is content. In other words, if the page content cannot be found, there won't be any content to display, and I don't want this function to execute in that case. So I want to have some sort of an error handling here. Right now that'll work. Now this doesn't exist yet, so I'm going to create it. I'm going to create it right up at the very top of my constructor. Let's see, content. Content exists. I'm going to set it to 0. We're going to assume the content doesn't exist, and then if the content does exist, we're going to set it to 1. Okay, good. All right. Now we should have a mechanism that we can choose to show our content only if the form was not submitted. I can't remember if it was show content or display content. Show content, okay. And for the login, we'll just do that. Okay, so now if I go to the sign up page, let's start by not submitting. Okay, the content gets shown. Now if I submit it, content is not shown. Excellent, that's what I wanted. All right. So if the form is submitted, we want to do some processing here. Now, let's take a look at what the different things that were submitted are. Right now we just have username and password. Okay, so we're going to need to create an SQL statement using that username and password, and I'm going to use this to demonstrate something called SQL injection, which is something you should know when it comes to keeping things secure. So let's suppose I did this, which is a really bad idea. Let's suppose that I said, well, yeah, just for the fun of it. Let's suppose I said my SQL query is going to be, let's see, let's look at the MySQL here. Okay, so let's cut and paste this. The insert into users, just like this. We're going to cut and paste it exactly as we had it in our database. And let's suppose that all I did here is right here I put whatever they gave for the username, and right here I put whatever they gave as the password. Now if they gave a good username and password, this is going to work just fine. But take a look at what happens if they didn't. Alright, so let's resubmit the form here. And let's see if I can enlarge this. Okay, and I don't want to do the print R statement. Okay, and I didn't put in a password. Actually, I need to do that. That just says password. Okay, so here's what I have. I have insert into users, username, password, values, username, password. This is going to work just fine if I cut and paste this. You'll see it works just fine. I inserted into the database. But watch what happens if I do this. I'm going to place as the username let's create that table. Okay. Now watch this. Now look at the, whoop, I made a slight mistake here. Let's do that again. I think. Now let's see if that works. All right, so just so you can see an example of what this looks like here, what it's going to do is it's first going to insert into users whatever's here, just pretending that this is valid SQL for the purpose of demonstration. And then it's going to immediately run this command, drop table users.testTable. Exactly. xkcd has a nice example of this. But that's why you must always assume that the input that someone is going to put into any form, even something very basic, you might have a comment, you know, a place where people can comment, it can be anything. You've got to be extremely careful and always validate your input. And even in the URL bar, sometimes there might be something, especially with an MVC framework, maybe if someone's very clever here and they know your code very well, they can type something here that magically does something it's not supposed to do. And the way that you prevent that is like I showed you before. Always control the format and the length of any input that you receive. So in order to make that process easy, we're going to use a couple of functions, some that are built into PHP and some that we're going to build ourselves, that will sanitize the input. But I just want you to see kind of how SQL injection works. That's a very basic example. I'm not going to show you well, let me just, for the fun of it here. And now, you see here where it says query OK, 0 rows affected. And you see that users.testTable doesn't exist. Well, the reason why is because once all of that executed, it deleted users.testTable, which was certainly not what I wanted to happen. All right, so how do we prevent that? First of all, you have to assume that someone's going to that someone is going to use SQL injection. So never use $_post or $_get in an SQL statement ever. Always create a new set of variables or a new array from that, and here's a real easy way to do that. There's a lot of ways to do this, but here's a simple example. And now regular expressions. I want to say anything that is not A to Z, 0 to 9, or a space is going to get converted. Actually, let's take out the space since we're doing username and password. Anything that is not A to Z or 0 to 9 is going to get changed to nothing. Now, when I do that and I change my $_post to safe post, and we try the same exact example, watch what happens. And do you see here how now it's removed all of the malicious code, and I'm left with a valid username and a valid password, and I don't have to worry about SQL injection. But also, I don't want to have to do this for each statement in every class that I build, and I don't want to do it in this particular way. I want to have different rules for what input is allowed depending on the type of data it is. I might, for example, in a comment that someone might write, I do want spaces, but I don't want spaces in a username, so I'm going to create a whole new class to deal with that, which we're going to do right now. So let me get out of all of this. So I want to have a function for each data type that I'm going to have. So let's have a function for alphanumeric. So the way this works is it's going to get a value and it's going to return value after it's been changed. There we go. Now, before you're finished writing any function or class, you always want to test. And here a really simple way we can test is like this. Oh. And you see here that my test result worked just fine. And now, just as kind of a mental note that I did that, what I'm going to do is this. Which actually, yeah, that's fine. So at the bottom of this class, I'll have my different unit tests to know that I did the test. And then if I ever want to redo the test, I can just uncomment that section and run the test. Okay, so we have alphanumeric. Let's go ahead and have a function for alphanumeric space. Just going to cut and paste this code. That should do the trick. And let's test it. Nope, it didn't work. But that's because I didn't name the function right. Okay, good. So we know that that works. There we go. All right, that's fine. So now we're going to require this sanitation file, and we're going to use it. Hopefully I find the right location for it. Alright, let's watch my error log here to see if it says could not require the file. Okay. I don't see that it says that I can't find the file, but I do see some other warnings that will clean up here. So it looked like that worked. Good. Okay, so now we can use the sanitation class not only in this class, the general page class, but also in any class that extends it, which includes these guys. So this login and sign up can also use the sanitization class. Okay, here we go. So now instead of using this for each statement that we did, what we can do here is, let's see, how do I want to do this? Yeah, we'll just do this. There. And because we're going to want to do this for any page, let's actually go ahead and move this into the main class. Into the constructor. Maybe right here is good. Oops. Okay, so if this is submitted, then we're going to create a new variable or a new array called safe post, which we know contains the sanitized version of $_post. Okay. All right. And now we can just leave it like that and move these to here, and now we can test it. Okay, I've got an error somewhere, and I think I know where. Ah, right here. It's because I took out my if statement, so I'm trying to think how I want to do this. Yeah, I think I do want... Oops. That should be right. There we go. No. Yeah, what am I doing here? This is... Wow. Oh, is set. Right. Okay. Okay, there we go. Okay, it's not giving me any values, so something's broken. Ah, safe post should be $this safe post. All right, there we go. So this works fine. Now, just to make sure that it works completely fine, let's try to submit a horrible value for these. And it works fine. One more test just to be safe. Okay, good. All right, so the form now works properly and it's sanitized. And we also went ahead and created a general class that the other classes can extend from. I think this is a good place to call it a day. We can go ahead and open it up for questions and answers now, and then tomorrow I'll go ahead and make the submit form actually submit something. Alright, so if you have questions, type Q and enter. That way I know you have a question. And if no one has any questions, we'll go ahead and wrap it up here in about a minute. Oh, and while we're here, I have a question for you guys. If I were to change the time of this session forward 30 minutes so that instead of starting it at 5 EDT, I started it at 5:30, would anyone here have a problem with that, or would that work for everyone? Yeah, I think we'll talk about MySQL passwords and such probably in the next session. That's a little bit more involved than I want to do right now. But in general, you don't put the MySQL password in your PHP code. And I'll show you some good ways to avoid that. But that is a little bit complicated, and I want to go through that later. Okay. So 5:30 EDT is going to be the new time for these sessions. I might even move it a little more forward, maybe even to 6, but probably not. Let's try 5:30 for the time being and see if that works. And I didn't quite understand your question when you said that tomorrow I'm going to make it so if they enter an invalid username and password, it spits it out instead of just sanitizing it. Oh, now I understand what you're asking. Right, it'll just reject it outright. I mean, there's a few ways you can go. You can either just sanitize whatever comes in and not worry about it, or you can do that and then create an alert to let you know that someone was trying to compromise your system, or you could just reject it outright. I'm not sure which route I'll take yet. We'll see. But one thing I do want you to notice is that you do sanitation on the server side, not the client side. In other words, I'm not going to have JavaScript here alone anyways. Like if I put in some invalid value here and I hit submit, I don't want a JavaScript window pop up saying, oh, you can't do that. You put a semicolon and that's not allowed. That is not secure because it's trivial for someone to bypass JavaScript. You must do sanitation server side. Inside of your PHP or Python or whatever server-side language you're using, that's where you do the sanitation, because if you do it client-side in the web browser, like with JavaScript, it's easy for someone to get past that. In fact, let me just show you how easy it is. So if I run this command, oops. I think this is right. Yeah, what am I doing wrong? Yeah, it is -d. Okay, so, and I don't need -k, I don't know why I put that. I'm not going to dwell on it right now, but it is trivial to engineer a statement that looks something like this, that just specifies the curl data in this form, or the post data in this form, and then you can just bypass whatever JavaScript someone might have set up to prevent you from using invalid characters. Oh, I see what you're saying. Well, what would happen is if we did it that way, which we probably won't, then on the following page it would confirm to them your username is this and your password is this. But more than likely what we're going to do is in the JavaScript we are still going to have validation in addition to the server-side validation just to prevent them from doing that. So if they were to bypass the JavaScript, then it's still going to sanitize the input, but the JavaScript is going to guide them to not create input that needs to be validated in the first place. So if I go to the form when it's done and I start typing in a value, if that value is invalid, then it's going to bring up a little JavaScript pop-up, or it's going to, on the following page, it'll say there are problems with your form, fix this and resubmit, and it'll say, you know, your username contains invalid characters, please use alphabetic characters only, something like that. But at the same time, if they bypass that because they're clever and they use curl or something else, then the server side, PHP, is still going to sanitize the input before any processing occurs. Exactly. Server side for security, JavaScript for convenience, covers it perfectly. Very well said. And as to having more than 2 levels of class inheritance, that's actually a really good question because each language is different, and PHP doesn't do it the way C++ does in a lot of ways. So that's actually a good question. There's a few aspects to that question. On the one hand, there's can one class extend another, and can another extend that one, and can another extend that one? I'm pretty sure the answer to that is yes. But the other thing is that one class in certain programming languages can actually extend from multiple classes. You could have, you know, class A that extends from class B, class C, and class D, and therefore shares all of those functions. There's a lot of complexity to that. In fact, it can become so complex that it becomes a bad idea because it becomes impossible to read the code, especially when you have functions sharing the same name. But in general, I believe that the answer to how many levels of class inheritance, there might be some hard limit on that. Might be some large number like 64, or it might be indefinite, or it might be just one. I'm not 100% sure. I'd have to look at php.net for that. All right, anyone else have any questions? If so, go ahead and type Q and enter so that I know you have a question. It really depends on what you're building. I've definitely had situations where I've used more than 2 levels of extending. I don't know if it'll happen in this case or not. When you say working directory, what do you mean exactly? Ah, right. That would be whatever directory the file's in fact, here, just to show you that. I'm pretty sure that's right anyways. Okay, no. It is the directory that is your htdocs. No, actually, you know what it is? It's this. The file that's doing all of these require statements initially is index.php, which is right here. Oops, no, it's not. Right here. this index.php is doing all of these require statements, which then do more require statements and such. And this is where the PWD is actually taking everything from. I'm pretty sure. Let's test that real quick. All right. Init/public. Okay, see, it's /public here, even though in the Apache configuration I told it to use var www LiveStream Startup. So the answer is what I said the first time, which is that it is going to be your main PHP file that does whatever requires. The PWD is going to stay the same throughout all of those requires. So if I'm looking at any particular class that's been required and I run the PWD command, it's still going to be the same directory, which is whatever directory the index.php happens to be in. There. So you see here that there's two PWDs being executed. This one is from the index.php, and this one is from, I believe, the signup class, and they're both to the same directory because the signup class gets required by something that's required by index.php. So the working directory is maintained throughout that hierarchy. Yep, exactly. All right, anyone else have any questions? It definitely gets easier with time, and it also gets easier when you really understand it well. The thing about classes and methods, which is, I mean methods or functions, whatever you want to call them, I call them functions usually, but what you really need to remember about a class is that a class is a template of something that doesn't exist yet. So when I create a class, it doesn't exist until I instantiate it, and I do that with the new command. So for example, all right, so here, let's look at the session, class.session.php. All right, so here we create a class called tsession, but see, this class doesn't exist yet, just from the fact that this PHP code executed does not actually create the class. What creates the class is this, and I could actually create more than one of those. I could do session2 equals new tsession, and now I have a totally different instantiation of that class. I can have 30 of them if I want, and every time I do that, I now have the ability to do something like this, for example, where some function is some function that's defined within this class. So for example, like so. So basically, you create the class and you define what functions it's going to have, what variables it's going to have, but you don't actually use the class until you instantiate it. That's the idea. And what will really help you understand classes is this. Give me 1 second. So let's just edit a test file here. And we're going to do the class creation and instantiation in the same place. Class, test class. All right, now let's save this file and let's try running it. So I'm going to just use !php%. That'll run the file. And nothing happens because this class doesn't exist. And I can't use this function yet. If I do this, for example, it's going to not work. It's going to give me all kinds of errors here because there is no such thing as test class. Test class is just the name of a template for some future class that doesn't exist yet. Now if I do this, now it exists, but I haven't executed any function. And now if I do this, and you'll see that it works. Now what if I want it to do something when I instantiate it? Well, for that I use a constructor. There's two ways to create a constructor. I can do it like this. You see that works? Or I can give this function the name of the class template, and it'll work the same way. I prefer to do it this way because what if I change the name of the class, then I have to change it here and it's more work, and it's just nice to know that it's already set here. Now if I create more than one class, surprised it didn't. Oops. Probably because I'm in Vim and it strips out the new line characters. Okay, fine. Oh. Right. There you go. Okay, so you can see that each of these is a unique instance of this class called test class. But here's something kind of cool. Let me create a variable here. I'm going to call it, I don't know, name. No, I'm not going to call it name. I'm going to call it my name. And now let's create a new function. Let's make it where this function displays what my name is. All right. So for starters, we're going to set my name equal to Carl. Now each of these instantiations, as you see, they all will say Carl, but I can change it in one of these. Let's create a variable, or let's create a function that does that. And we're only going to make class 2 run that function. Oops. Okay. And now watch what happens. And now you can see that this one says Carl, this one says Joe, and this one says Carl. So you can actually have multiple instantiations of the same class template that are actually very different. You could have very different kinds of data processing going on. There can be all sorts of differences in how they operate, and that's one of the reasons why you use classes, is that you have different objects, and an object is only an instantiation of a class. So when you hear someone say object, think of it in terms of, oh, a class that's been instantiated. So if you have multiple objects, in this case we have 3 objects, all of these objects are instantiations of the class template that we call test class. All 3 of these objects can be different in some way. They can have different attributes, different variables, set to different values, and they can do totally different things from one another. So this is a nice instructive example of using classes, so I'm going to go ahead and leave it in here and allow people to edit it on their own. I'm going to rename it though. There. Oops. There we go. Okay, so when it comes to copy pasting in Vim, that's sometimes if you cut and paste from a web page or some file, it just changes the formatting. What usually helps there is to first save it into something, or first cut and paste it into maybe a different window like Notepad, and then recopy it. And then when you paste it into Vim, always remember first push I for insert. That way whatever you paste will be pasted in insert mode, and that usually helps. Right, anyone else have any questions? Yeah, I hope they didn't actually get pushed, but whenever you edit a file in Vim, Vim creates a .swp file, and since I have these 2 files open in Vim, it's creating those files. Those are basically designed so that if you get disconnected or your Vim session crashes, you can recover what you were previously working on. It doesn't really hurt anything, but that's what the SWP files are, and if SWP is already in use, it'll use SWO and so on. Those are swap files that Vim uses just to be able to recover work that you're already doing. And yes, it'll be 5:30 p.m. tomorrow, and of course I'll update the message at the top of the subreddit to reflect that. Alright, anyone else have any questions? If so, then type Q so that I know you have a question. Alright, so seeing as no one has any questions, we're going to go ahead and call it a day. And I just want to remind everyone that if you enjoy these sessions, please help spread the word that they exist. And I will see everyone tomorrow at 5:30.